guys, it's Luke here for our first week of NFL games and our Draftkings Week 1 slate preview. This is one of my favorite times of the entire year, going into the first week's games. You get those excitement, it's hard to sleep before that Thursday night game. Obviously that game's tonight, really looking forward to that. But overall, a lot of excitement, a lot of hope for a lot of people's teams, and overall, a big contest in DraftKings as well. You have some of the biggest contests of the year here in Week 1, multiple milli makers, some massive GPPs, some single entry stuff, pretty much anything you want out there. So go ahead, enter all the contests you want. I'm going to have a lot of fun this weekend, and what we're going to do here on this video is go through my favorite picks for the weekend slate. Again, this will be for the main slate, the 13 game slate, and we're going to go position by position, going over my top 6 picks for DFS. There's going to be a wide variety of salary ranges used, some value picks, some guys higher up the board that I really think are going to smash. So overall, just sit back, relax. We're going to go through the slate and go through all the best plays according to my custom modeling. I use a very similar approach I use to golfing, where I go ahead, I try to model all the target shares, all of the shares in terms of rushing possessions, how many passes expected, all those kind of things. And I go ahead and simulate them. I try to figure out the people that are being a little bit overlooked the same way I do in golf as well. So if you've been around for that kind of content and now you're watching my NFL stuff, it's going to look very similar style of analysis as well. So without further ado, let's hop into our picks this week for our top 6 quarterbacks to target here for the Week 1 slate. So starting off with our quarterbacks here, we're going to go over our top 6 picks. And at number 6, we have Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. I really like the price tag this week at just $5,700. I also really like the opponent he's fighting, the matchup he's going to have against the Minnesota Vikings. Both of them are very high volume offenses. Teams that like to throw the ball 40, even 50 times a game, where they're in a high-volume shootout type of affair. And that's what I expect between these two offenses. They're a little bit underrated. We saw Minnesota rank as a top 10 offense last year, top 5 for the second part of the year as well. And Cincinnati was great when they had Joe Burrow active. Obviously went down towards the end of the year. A lot of people have some hesitancy going to him, coming back from that horrific injury, but Burrow was far from a mobile quarterback, did a lot of his work inside the pocket. I expect him to put a lot of work. Again, he was a rookie last year, so we should see some improvement here in his second time around. And again, I really like the price tag. I like the matchup. I think it's going to be a very high volume affair. It's something I'm going to be looking to stack here, as you'll see with my receiver targets here later on. At number 5, we have Jameis Winston, one of the most high volume passers in NFL history. Obviously puts up crazy numbers in terms of passing yards, passing touchdowns, that kind of thing, but also throws a ton of interceptions, had that infamous 30 interception year. But against the Green Bay Packers, you're going to be playing from behind for essentially the entire game. Green Bay is massively favored in this game. Also, Jameis Winston in that offense is going to be going out there for the first time. He only started one game last year, and that was because of circumstance. Obviously, Taysom Hill coming in to start, Drew Brees going down, that sort of thing. But I have him projected for 20 points. Very respectable. At that $5,200 price tag, you're getting a ton of salary relief as well. And you can match him up with a few of my receiver targets as well. Marquez Callaway, it's no secret this week at only $3,400. You get great value there. So it's very easy to make a stack there with Kamara. You can include Callaway and obviously use Jameis Winston. So that's why he comes in at number 5. I really like that stack right there. They're going to throw the ball an absolute ton. I'm expecting 45, 46 target attempts from Jameis Winston, right around that mark. And as a result, he's going to have a very good fantasy week, even if he throws those interceptions. At number 4, we have Ryan Tannehill. I'm actually going to lump together number 4 and 3 here. Let me see, we have Kyler Murray at number 3. This is going to be an absolute shootout between the Cardinals and the Titans here. The game total's the highest on the entire slate, and you have two offenses that aren't afraid to go and enter a shootout. We saw last year Ryan Tannehill and the Titans get into multiple shootouts, the most of anyone in the NFL. It's not that they had a bad defense. Obviously, had Jadeveon Clowney, some good pieces on that defensive line. Hell, even a pretty decent secondary, but still let up a lot of points, and a lot of that was due to their play style. We're very aggressive on offense. Weren't afraid to run hurry-up offense, not chew off a lot of clock, despite being one of the best running teams in the NFL. And in terms of fantasy, that's exactly the kind of team that you want to target. Teams that aren't afraid to get into these shootouts, to score 45, 50 points to take home a win. And on the other side of the ball, in Kyler Murray, you have a very similar play style, right? Very high volume, Tons of hurry-up offense. One of the most prolific offenses last year, especially in terms of fantasy production. And Kyler Murray's only going to get better with time. He's somebody who was mostly a baseball player growing up, had played football for just a few years before he got drafted coming into the NFL. It's just going to get more experience, more comfortable in the pocket, obviously handle pressure better, those sort of things. I think the roof is absolutely just in the stars for somebody like Kyler Murray. Has extremely high potential. So that's why you see them at 3 and 4 there. I love taking one of the quarterbacks, stacking that offense, and also running it back with somebody from the other side. I think that game is very likely to be the highest total scoring game on the entire slate. So I want a lot of that. At number 2, we have Patrick Mahomes. You're not going to go wrong taking Patty Mahomes. I'm not going to go into crazy detail here, but at $8,100, you obviously don't love the price tag. The most expensive quarterback on the entire slate. I also don't love the matchup against Cleveland Browns. There's somebody who likes to air out the ball, take tons of rushing yards on the table, control the time of possession as well. But if there's anybody that's matchup proof, it's Patrick Mahomes. He can go out there, throw 3-4 touchdowns, 400 yards in the first half against just about anyone. We've seen it before against stout defenses. So if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, it comes with the opportunity cost at $8,100. But at number 1, my favorite guy to spend up for is Josh Allen. $7,400 this week against the very own Pittsburgh Steelers, my team. But I'm going to have to take Josh Allen because he has the rushing upside that I'm looking for in a quarterback. Also is going to get into a very high-scoring affair against these Pittsburgh Steelers. One of the higher totals on the entire slate, 48.5 points right now, according to Vegas, which may be surprising considering how good the defensive teams were last year. When these guys met up here in 2020, didn't score more than 20 points. So to see that kind of total, it shows just how kind of confidence they have in that Buffalo offense. Also on the Steelers side of the ball as well, adding Najee Harris to the mix, they should be a much more balanced team here in 2021. I think Josh Allen's going to light up the Steelers, probably run for a touchdown or two, pass for 1 or 2, en route to a touchdown or 2 victory. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I'm not a homer though. I am very realistic in our expectations. Expect to go something like 9-8 this year, potentially 10-7, that kind of thing. But Josh Allen, those Buffalo Bills, they're going to be the favorite out of the AFC. Them or the Chiefs. And I think it's going to come down to a duel just like it did last year. So Josh Allen at $7,400, even against the Steelers, I think it's just in a better matchup than somebody like Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to be a higher scoring affair. Josh Allen also brings that rushing upside to the table as well. I'm going to see him, I have him projected right now in my simulations for 5.5 rushing attempts per game. And he averages over 10 yards per rushing attempt. So that's 5-6 points right there in the bag. Obviously one of the better passers of the ball as well. Now getting into the running back plays. At number 6, we have Christian McCaffrey, who is one of the spend-up options I'm willing to go to this week, but I'm not thrilled about it. A lot of that has to do with the price tag at $9,500. The matchup's fine. It's New York Jets. They should absolutely smash them. The Carolina Panthers, that is. I project him for 22.5 points, and I'm not going to really stick too much on this pick. Obviously, one of the best, if not the best, fantasy producers in the entire NFL. But when you take a look at some of the guys priced below him, who I project for just less fantasy points at a much better salary, that's why I see myself going to them just a little bit more often. But he obviously cracks my top 6. He's not a bad play this week by any means, but in terms of point per dollar, he does take a hit because of that price hike. At number 5, though, somebody who doesn't have a price hike, very solid price at $7,000. That's Austin Eckler. A very decent matchup against the Washington football team as well. Washington's been a little bit porous of late, especially to opposing running backs. I have Eckler projected for 19.5 fantasy points right now. Same amount of rushing attempts and probably right around 5 catches. Somebody who gets very active in the backfield. So if you're in a PPR league, especially like it is here on DraftKings, I like him even more. That's why he cracks my top 6. I also love the price tag as well. He essentially lets you make a very balanced lineup outside that, which I really like. At the $9,500 price tag of McCaffrey makes you spend down at 1 or 2 positions elsewhere. So that's why I'm a little bit more keen on Eckler there. At number 4, we have James Robinson at $6,400. I absolutely love the matchup against the Houston Texans. The Texans are an absolute dumpster fire right now. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson's not their quarterback. I'm rolling out Tyrod Taylor, who has looked very bad this preseason. The whole team in general has looked horrible. I saw a tweet today by Barstool Sports that was like, name 2 players in the Houston Texans. And like 40-50% of the people were like, yeah, I can't do it. obviously I can. Anyone that's really into fantasy football can name, 5 or 6 guys on that offense at the very least. There's still guys that are fantasy viable on that team, but when it comes to raw talent, that team's going to get trounced week in and week out. So James Robinson, somebody who was a workhorse back for the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, I expect him to get a ton of carries, 20, maybe even 25 carries if they're routing them real bad, and that's more than enough to pay off a $6,400 price tag. So I don't expect him to be overlooked by any means. James Robinson's definitely going to be a relatively chalky play this week, but I'll be there with the field. At number 3, we have Derrick Henry at $8,800. There's nobody else in fantasy football that can break a slate quite like Derrick Henry. When he has those 250-yard games for 4 or 5 touchdowns, you absolutely have to have him. And here against the Arizona Cardinals, that could very well be this type of game. It's one of the highest totals in the entire slate. We already talked before about the quarterbacks in this game, but if I'm not taking one of those quarterbacks, or perhaps if I'm taking Kyler Murray, I love running it back with Derrick Henry, somebody who's going to get about 22, 23 rushing attempts in a competitive game. Could get even more if the Titans get ahead early. So I have him projected for 20.5 fantasy points. Very solid option. Don't love the $8,800 price tag. As you'll see with guys at number 2, especially at number 1, there's guys with better price tags out there, but obviously has that slate breaking ability, so that's why he cracks the top 6 this week. At number 2, we have Alvin Kamara at $8,600. He's going to be playing against the Packers this week, and while I don't love the matchup, again, I expect the Packers to be winning this game, to really get ahead early and to kind of put the Saints on their back foot. Kamara's great out of the backfield. Most of his production is as a receiver. And on DraftKings, where we're getting PPR, we're getting a lot of boost for guys that are good out of the backfield. Kamara should still have a good game even in that type of game script. They're going to throw to him a lot out of the backfield. He still remains a decent red zone target. And even last year when they really weren't a competitive team, especially when Drew Brees went down, Alvin Kamara still had some of his best games. They really relied on him. He's essentially 45% of that entire offense. So Alvin Kamara is going to be a great play week in and week out, especially when he's not over $9,000. And that $200 difference from Derrick Henry to Alvin Kamara, that's nice as well. And at number 1, though, we do have the cream of the crop at Raheem Mostert. And a lot of it comes down to price tag, only $5,800 this week. Also going against a very poor team in the Detroit Lions. And we expect the San Francisco 49ers to go out, absolutely trounce the Lions, get out to a big lead, and run the ball down their throats. We saw it week in and week out last year when the 49ers were competitive. They were doing it with running the ball, and Raheem Mostert's going to be the number 1 back in that backfield. Obviously going to be a little bit of a timeshare. We're going to see Trey Sermon quite a bit. Could even see JaMychal Hasty at times, but Mostert's going to see, I have him projected right now for 18.5 carries. Could very well see even more carries than that if they get ahead early. The 49ers ran the ball about 30 times per game last year, so even if they get ahead, we could see 35, 40 carries. Mostert's going to smash that 18.5 attempt number. So really like Mostert this week. Obviously at $5,800, you get a ton of salary relief. So if I'm looking to save salary at running back, it's definitely with Mostert because he has that safe carries capability. We know he's going to get 18 to 20 carries this week. And if they get ahead against a team as poor as the Detroit Lions, it could be even better. So love the potential there, especially in a GPP format. And now for our top wide receiver plays, kicking it off with Julio Jones of the Titans. Again, he's in that very high-scoring affair between the Cardinals and Titans, and I love targeting people in that game in general, so not a surprise to see Julio make this list. The boost to Julio this week is that we might not have A.J. Brown making it, so somebody who was questionable, came up late in the week. We're going to have to check closer to game time, so make sure you're checking his status on Saturday or Sunday if you're still making your lineups. But Julio Jones would get a massive boost if A.J. Brown doesn't make the lineup. Right now, I have him projected for 8.5 targets, 17.75 fantasy points. But if A.J. Brown sits, that's going to be closer to 11, 12 targets, closer to 22, 23 fantasy points. At that point, a $6,800 price tag, he would be a must-play, absolute chalk on the slate. But even if A.J. Brown cracks the lineup, again, he's going to be a little bit limited with that injury. I expect Julio Jones to take a little bit more of the lion's share of targets. That's why I have him there at 8.5 targets. And in a high-volume affair, a game that's going to crack 50, potentially even 60 points in terms of a total, I absolutely love Julio Jones. And in number 5, we have Marvin Jones Jr. The best part about him is the price. We'll get into that right here, $3,600. Also love the opponent, Houston Texans. We're expecting a blowout there. The Jaguars to get out to a huge lead, so perhaps that caps Jones' potential just a little bit. If they get out to a 21, 28-point lead, something like that in the first half, they're not going to be throwing the ball very much. So perhaps has to go out there and get his hay in the first half. But at $3,600, you're really looking for just 10 to 15 fantasy points. And right now I have him projected for 14. If he goes out there, scores a touchdown, has a big play, like he's very capable of. I mean, one of the best just deep ball artists in the NFL, one of the best at high pointing it. Marvin Jones, that's just his specialty, right? Those sideline catches, the balls that look completely uncatchable. Those are his highest percentage balls, believe it or not. So I have him projected right now for 7 targets, a very high upside player, somebody who can turn a 5-yard gain into a 95-yard touchdown. So I like targeting him there. Again, Trevor Lawrence, a rookie quarterback. That's not the best, but again, Trevor Lawrence is one of the highest touted prospects we've seen for quite some time. So if anybody's going to have a good debut performance, it's him, and Marvin Jones Jr. would be a direct beneficiary of that. At number 4, we have T. Higgins, somebody I love matching up with Joe Burrow. So he was my number 6 quarterback target there. T. Higgins, love matching up in stacks. He's only $4,700, so you're getting quite a bit of salary relief there. And again, the matchup against the Vikings is very sneaky. You know, it's a good matchup. The Vikings are a very high volume offense. Same thing with the Cincinnati Bengals when they had Joe Burrow. So I have him projected here for 14.5 fantasy points, 8.5 targets. Again, Higgins is a high volume player, somebody who runs a lot of those short routes, the really quick routes that Joe Burrow can check down to. So Higgins is not going to go out there and score a 60, 70-yard touchdown every game, but he's going to nickel and dime you to death. So in DFS formats like Draftkings, where you're getting that PPR boost, T. Higgins is an even better play. So that's why he comes in at number 4. And now these last 3 plays, though, I'd say they're on another tier of their own. These are by far my favorite 3 plays on the entire slate. I'm actually looking to get these 3 into most of my lineups. I'm jamming them in. At number 3, that's Davante Adams, the most expensive wide receiver on the slate, but he's only $8,300. You know, typically we're used to seeing Davante Adams closer to $9,000, maybe even $10,000 if he's really on a roll. And the matchup against the Saints is actually a good one. You know, they're a team that's lost a few key pieces on defense. So as a result, you know, we have him projected for 13 targets, 24.5 fantasy points. Nothing to hate about Davante Adams. If you want to go ahead and match him up with Robert Tonyan, somebody we're going to get to here in my tight end targets, obviously with Aaron Rodgers as well. I don't hate that stacking option. But at number 2, my best value option in the entire slate, somebody who's going to be a near lock for me, that's Marquez Callaway of the New Orleans Saints. He's only $3,400. Yes, $400 above the minimum, absolutely ridiculous, and he's the number 1 wide receiver out there for the Saints. I have him projected for 8 targets, 15.75 fantasy points. He's somebody who Jameis Winston has been looking to a lot during the preseason, and if you guys remember Jameis Winston, I mean, he just puts up crazy fantasy numbers. You obviously saw him crack my top 6 quarterbacks earlier. I love stacking him up with Marquez Callaway, like I mentioned before as well. Jameis Winston makes trash players, dog shit players, look great. I mean, think about Rashad Perriman. I mean, he just got cut by the Detroit Lions. The Lions have no one at wide receiver. I mean, they're starting 2 rookies. They cut Perriman, like I said, and Perriman looked great with the Buccaneers when Jameis was his quarterback. So somebody who's actually talented like Marquez Callaway, absolutely love the potential. And at $3,400, all he has to do is to get you 7 or 8 fantasy points and you can get by. But again, I have him projected for nearly 16 fantasy points. An absolute smash play. Love him there at number 2. But my number 1 fantasy play of the entire week, my number 1 wide receiver this week is DeAndre Hopkins. One of the targets I'm smashing in that very high volume affair, $7,800. I love the little bit of salary relief you get from Davante Adams. Also love the fact that he's by far the best target on that team. Obviously, they brought in A.J. Green. They have Chris Kirk out there. But in terms of a deep threat, DeAndre Hopkins is bar none on that team. I have him projected for 11.5 targets, 23 fantasy points. And obviously, because he's by far the number 1 receiver on that team, isn't competing with somebody like Julio Jones or A.J. Brown, I think he has potential to score 30, even 40 fantasy points. We saw it a few times last year. Hopkins has those ceiling games in him, and it could very well be the case in this 60, even 65-point affair. So love him there at number 1, and that's why he makes the top of the list. And now for our top tight ends to target. At number 6, we have Dallas Goedert, the absolute safety blanket for Jalen Hurts there in Philadelphia. Love the price tag there at $4,800. Also really like the opponent, the matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Going to be a relatively high-scoring affair. Obviously, 2 high-volume offenses. Guys that are going to absolutely speed it up with their pace. So on the Atlanta Falcons side, a defense that's kind of in shambles, has pieces falling apart, going to other teams. Guys that are injured aren't going to be out there. So expect Jalen Hurts to have some relative success against them. And like I said, Goddard has been the safety blanket for the young quarterback, has been the most targeted player of anyone on the entire team, has actually seen even more looks than fellow college mate Davante Smith. Obviously, a lot of hype going to Davante Smith. A lot of people are going to him in fantasy as a result. But in camp, all the reports have been that Goddard has been that #1 target. So I have him projected here for 13.5 fantasy points, 6 projected targets. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he got closer to 7 or even 8 targets. Zach Ertz is going to be in the picture as well. And believe it or not, the #2 target on that team in preseason has been Zach Ertz. So both tight ends could be potential targets here. But if I'm going to have a 1A and a 1B, 1A is going to be Goddard, and then 1B is definitely going to be Zach Ertz there. Now for number 5, we have George Kittle, $6,300. So the price tag isn't great, but definitely somebody worth paying up for. I definitely like the matchup against the Detroit Lions. We've already gone over how bad I think they're going to be this year. So have him projected right now for 17.75 fantasy points. Also projected for 8.5 projected targets. So somebody who's definitely going to get the lion's share of targets there in the 49ers. The only problem is that they're a run-first offense. So Kittle's going to have to hope to get in the end zone to have a ceiling performance, but obviously being one of the better targets in the NFL, very possible. So not my favorite target to take up top, but somebody who I'm not minding if he slips into a few lineups of mine. At number 4, we have Travis Kelce at $8,300, and right on cue, the guy I would spend up for if I had the money. He's $8,300. Again, not the best matchup against the Cleveland Browns, but if anybody's matchup proof, it is that Kansas City offense, a team that's capable of putting up a 40 or 50 bomb, even against the best defenses in the NFL. So right now I have Travis Kelce projected for 22.6 fantasy points, 10.5 projected targets, and somebody who's going to get the most looks of anyone on the team. Obviously Tyreek Hill, a little bit more of a down-the-field threat, but in PPR formats like we have here in Draftkings, Travis Kelce is the king here on that team, and well-deserving of that $8,300 price tag. Identical to Davante Adams. It's definitely a little bit of sticker shock being so much more expensive than the #2 guy there in Kittle, but definitely worth it. And taking a look at my simulations, he's absolutely off the walls good. Somebody who fits the bill there and somebody I'm definitely targeting. At number 3, we have Logan Thomas at $4,600. Somebody who will be playing against the Los Angeles Chargers and another high-scoring affair. LA, high-volume offense, somebody who goes out there and passes the ball an absolute ton. And on the Washington side of things, now that they have Ryan Fitzpatrick, they're going to be a passing-first offense as well. Last year had a little bit more of a run-first attack there with Antonio Gibson, with J.D. McKissick as well. But now that they have another year of that offense, a better quarterback in my opinion, they don't have Haskins out there anymore. The guy who can't even make the #2 on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's not even a backup quality level player. But now they have a legit starter out there, and Logan Thomas was very solid last year. I expect that to even improve here in 2021. So I have him only projected for 5.5 targets, but very quality targets at that, projecting him for 14.1 fantasy points. So like him, that's why he comes in at number 3, even cheaper than Dallas Goedert. So like him a little bit more. I project him a little bit higher as well. At number 2, we have Robert Tonyan. So I mentioned before potentially pairing him with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. I really like the matchup against the Saints. The price tag is even better at $4,200. I have him projected for 5 targets, 14.4 fantasy points. So somebody I have a lot of confidence in this week. Obviously was a little bit touchdown dependent last year, got a majority of his fantasy points, but getting into the end zone. But we don't hate guys like that, right? If they're going to score a ton of touchdowns, obviously that's going to be relatively consistent. And at the tight end position, that's a little bit more frequent and a little bit more prominent than at other positions, right? You don't like when wide receivers are necessarily touchdown dependent or running backs at that, because you don't know if they're going to get the targets. But at tight end, that's pretty typical. That's what we're used to seeing from a lot of guys. So I'm not as worried about Tonyan for that reason. And at number 1, though, we have Kyle Pitts, $4,400. I think this is a complete misprice. Kyle Pitts is going to be right along the tier of guys like Darren Waller, George Kittle as well. So I think in just a few weeks, he's in that $6,000 range. I also love the matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, a game I think is going to be relatively high volume. We're going to see quite a few passes on each side of the ball. So I have him projected right now for 6.5 targets, 15.8 projected points. That's 18 to 20% of the targets there in Atlanta. So I think that could even be a little bit of a, let's say, safe projection, right? I think it could be a little bit lower than in reality. He's somebody who's a great target, People think the world of him. I mean, a top 10 draft pick this year. We don't see that very often for tight ends by any means. So I have him as a very similar prospect to somebody like Jimmy Graham when we saw him first emerge. Somebody who's extremely athletic, extremely tall, was able to separate with his speed as well. Kyle Pitts looks like a very similar player. I mean, obviously hasn't had all the injuries, is a lot younger, should be a lot more explosive than Jimmy Graham is right now. So I think the absolute world of the young kid. So at $4,400, it's definitely going to be chalky this week, but well worth going to in my opinion. That's all I've got for the week 1 DraftKings picks, guys. Let me know in the comments who your favorite value pick on the entire slate is. Perhaps it's Marquez Callaway there at that $3,400 price tag. Maybe it's one of the cheap running backs on the slate, one of the rookie wide receivers. Hell, anyone, right? Just let me know in the comments. We'd love to hear about it. And as always, I really appreciate the viewership. If you guys could like and subscribe if you guys haven't done already, I'd really appreciate that as well. So look forward to tomorrow's content. We're going to be going through my top 20 players at every position for fantasy football. So if you have a season-long fantasy league, are trying to decide who to play as your number 2 running back, your number 3 wide receiver, that kind of thing, that's exactly what we're going to be going over. So feel free to check that out. And until then, I'll see you guys next time.